Welcome to the Pacific Flyway Shorebird Survey video on counting, also known as estimating, shorebird flocks. In this video, we will record a few methods for counting shorebirds, whether they are foraging, roosting, or flying. First, let's talk a little bit about estimation. Do you know how well you estimate the number of birds in a flock? It is the rare person who can estimate bird numbers with good accuracy. Some people underestimate the number of birds in a flock, while other people overestimate the numbers of birds in a flock. Again, it is the rare person who tends to estimate bird numbers accurately. However, practice will improve your estimation abilities. Practice is what we will do and talk about in this video. A few more comments on estimation before we get started. Did you know that most people underestimate the number of birds in a large flock? That most people underestimate numbers when birds are small and overestimate numbers when birds are large? That most people underestimate when birds are darkly colored and overestimate when birds are lighter colored? Keep these facts in mind as you set out to practice counting and when conducting surveys of shorebirds. Now, let's talk about how to estimate shorebird flocks. As you set out to do your survey and approach your survey area, make a few mental notes about the general conditions of your survey area and of the surrounding area. Do you see lots of birds using the survey area? Maybe just a handful? Or does it appear that there are no shorebirds in the survey area? Also, are there any ongoing activities nearby with the potential to disturb shorebirds using your survey area? Are there people walking in or nearby the survey area? Are there dogs nearby? Are there any large pieces of machinery in action? Taking note of what is going on in and around your survey area will help you determine the best way to count the birds so your count is efficient and effective. If your survey area appears to have no birds, please take care to make a thorough search of your area using your binoculars and spotting scope. Birds may not be visible at first, but upon closer inspection, you may find some. The first method of counting birds that we will talk about is a true count. True counts are generally done when there are 50 birds or less in your survey area and no nearby disturbance. These conditions give you the opportunity to appreciate each bird individually. Take a moment to count and identify to species the birds that you see in this photo. In this photo, there are 14 individual leaf sandpipers. Now let's talk about a situation where there are lots more shorebirds in your survey area. In this particular case, they are roosting, and there is no nearby disturbance. There are too many birds to count each one individually, so we must use a form of estimation. For the dominant species in this flock, there are 20 individuals across the front of the flock, and about 16 individuals from front to back. Multiplying these numbers together, we get an estimate of 320. Do you know which species dominates this flock? That's right, it's marbled godwit. Note that there are a few other species in this photo, including sanderling, that should also be recorded on the survey data sheet. Do you see any others that we missed? Perhaps the trickiest situation to count shorebirds is when a flock is in flight. Shorebirds may take flight as you approach the survey area and require you to make a quick estimation of the number and species of birds. Or you may be in the midst of counting a flock of roosting or foraging birds that suddenly takes flight due to a falcon flying over the area. Whatever the cause, flocks in flight must be counted quickly and as accurately as possible. This may seem difficult and confusing, but with practice and patience, it becomes easier. You can easily identify the species in flight in this photo because of the distinctive white patch on the back in flight. This makes them dowitchers. We don't ask you to distinguish between long-billed and short-billed dowitchers in the field, and we prefer that you don't. Inspecting each individual would take far too long to do during the survey. However, please feel free to revisit your survey area after the survey window has ended to make any notes or confirm any identifications. This flock of dowitchers is flying, and flying quickly. An easy way to estimate the number of birds in the flock is to look at a smaller portion of the flock, count the number of birds in it, and then apply that over the whole flock, until you have an estimate for the whole flock. In this case, there are approximately 100 dowitchers. Another layer of complexity that must be considered when counting shorebirds is mixed flocks. Here we have a mixed flock of shorebirds that are alert. They are roosting, but their posture signals alertness and tells us to act quickly. Again, we use the technique of looking at a smaller portion of the flock, counting the birds in it, and then applying that to the rest of the flock. In the circle, there are about 30 shorebirds, with an approximate composition of 75% marbled godwits and 25% willets. Applying circles to the rest of the flock, we get an estimate of 270 birds. Then we apply the ratio of marbled godwits to willets to the overall total to get an estimate for each species of 67 willets and 203 godwits. This is what you would record on your data sheet. In an ideal world, we would have an infinite amount of time to count and identify each shorebird present in the survey area. This would give us a true count of the number of birds present and species composition. However, this is rarely, if ever, the case. The next best way to count shorebirds is to estimate the number of birds present and the proportion of species in the flock, like we did in the previous example. Sometimes it may not even be possible to determine the proportion of each species in the flock. If this is the case, make note of which species are present, and you'll be able to choose a mixed species flock from the species list when you enter the data. The more information you can gather, the better, so keep adding layers of complexity as time allows. It is best to get out and practice counting shorebirds in the field, but if you'd like to practice flock estimation from the comfort of your own home, you can do so using beans or even grains of rice. Spread a small quantity onto a sheet of paper, and taking only a short amount of time, between 15 and 30 seconds, estimate the number of beans. Confirm your estimate afterwards by counting each bean. Do this several times. The flocks can be single species using only one type of bean, or mixed flocks using multiple types of beans. You can create flocks that are packed closely together or spread apart. Doing this, you'll find out if you tend to overestimate or underestimate the number of birds, and you will continually improve. Here are a few resources for you to consult about shorebird flock estimation. Whenever possible, we encourage you to get outside and count the real thing. Now it's time to test yourself. The next 5 slides are photographs of shorebirds. Each photo will be displayed for 10 to 15 seconds. Do your best to estimate the number of birds and the species composition of each group of shorebirds. Have fun. Jot down notes just as you would in the field. The answers will be discussed after all 5 slides have been displayed. Now let's talk about the results. This first example was an easy one and a good way to get your feet wet with estimation. There are 7 western sandpipers in flight. How do we know they are western sandpipers? The bill is slightly long and drooping, and there are small amounts of rufous feathers on the scapulars and back. This flock was counted using an exact count. The second example was also of a small flock, but this flock has more than one species. The black-bellied plover should be easy to identify by size and shape. The 6 sanderlings stand out because of how light they are, and the 17 least sandpipers are small and brown. This flock was also counted using an exact count. In the next example, there are 65 dowitchers. This flock could have been counted or estimated. The next example was a difficult one. This flock of shorebirds is flying head-on, making counting and identification difficult. In this example, it makes sense to count a smaller group and apply that across the flock. This leads to an estimate of 140 birds. In this instance, it is not possible to tell which species these are. From a different angle in the field, it might be possible to determine the species composition. However, for the purposes of this example, you would record western least sandpiper or dunlin as a mixed species flock. This flock was counted using an estimation technique. Finally, the last example is challenging due to the distance involved. Counting a smaller portion and then applying it across the flock estimates about 100 birds present of a small species variety that is not identifiable. Therefore, it is a western least dunlin type bird. There is also 1 black-necked stilt and 1 marbled godwit that are identifiable and should be recorded on the data sheet. Most of the birds were counted using estimation, except for the 1 stilt and 1 godwit. Thanks for practicing your estimation skills. Once again, here are the links to other estimation resources. Thank you for participation and for completing this video. We thank you for helping make shorebirds count.